Hi, everyone. I hope that you had a great first week of my being out. I got only terrific reports from Mr. Wilcox. I want to sort of start this week by sort of introducing the war in the Pacific. So give me a opportunity to share my screen really quick. Obviously, we're going to start with Pearl Harbor. That's where the war starts. That's really the most important date in terms of the United States participation in the war. We will talk about the quote that I've included there, a date which will live in infamy. This slideshow will really take 2 days. I'm not going to talk all of the 45 minutes today. That it'll kind of roll into tomorrow as well. But first, I want to give a couple. I'm going to we'll start with a quote by Admiral Yamamoto. He said, "We should do our best to decide the fate of the war on the very first day." Talk about how Pearl Harbor was the Japanese attempts to really destroy the American fleet before the war even began, and the reasons for which that failed and what happened next. But first, a couple of announcements. My daughter was born on Monday afternoon. My wife and my son are doing great. When I come back, I will share pictures and a name and all of that. But for right now, everything is good. We are home and just sort of adjusting to life. In terms of the assignment that you guys did on Wednesday and Thursday, I got very many emails. I appreciate it, by the way, saying there were some issues uploading the files, largely because I limited it, I think, to MP4, and that's not the file type that was the easiest for you guys to download it as. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reopen the assignment and changes that you can submit any kind of file. So everyone's going to have to make sure there's something submitted. But if you do this by Wednesday morning, there'll be no penalty. That's just going to be, I'll change the due date to 8:10 a.m. on Wednesday morning. If you have any questions about that, and I'll put an announcement out on Canvas as well, please let me know. But really, I think that should be fairly straightforward. So I hope that, I apologize for that, and I hope that you all can sort of figure out how to upload it correctly. All right, let's talk Pearl Harbor. I'm going to link to this video on Canvas. I'm sure that most of you are familiar, generally speaking, with the events of December 7th, 1941. But if not, you should certainly watch this. So I've told you many, many times that I'm not big on dates. That I don't, if I want you to memorize a specific date, I will tell you. All right, I'm telling you, this is a date you absolutely need to know. December 7th, 1941. That, you memorize it, put it in your brain if you don't know it already. Whatever it is, you're going to need to know it. I can assure you it will show up on some kind of assessment. So, take that for what it will. Pearl Harbor, for those of you who do or do not know, is sort of the harbor that's outside Honolulu, Hawaii, on the island of Oahu. It was and is a major United States naval base. And it was the site, of course, the attack by the Japanese that started World War II, or started the American involvement in World War II. See, here's this is sort of a map that the Japanese attacked in sort of two different waves from both the west and the east. You'll see where Pearl Harbor is. Again, this is a devastating attack on the American fleet. Not quite catastrophic for reasons we'll talk about in a second, but it was bad. This is the memorial there in actual Pearl Harbor. I'm sure that some of you in this room have been there. This is the memorial to the USS Arizona, one of the American ships that was sunk that day. Obviously, this is going to lead to some strong reactions from the American public, even the American public that was significantly opposed to war, which was, most of the American public, by the way, could not argue that we should stay out of the war. I mean, this is an attack. That would be crazy. The headline such as this is from the Honolulu newspaper, appeared all over the country. 1,500 dead in Hawaii. Actually ends up being more than that. Congress votes war. This vote happens the day after the attack. Only one person in either the House or the Senate voted against war. And it was Jeanette Rankin. I talked about her very briefly when we talked about World War I. She was the first woman elected to the House of Representatives. She was, in fact, elected to the House of Representatives before women could vote. It's pretty impressive. She was a dedicated and vocal pacifist, and she did not believe in war, so she voted against it. Didn't really matter. The tally was so overwhelming that the United States enters the war, and as part of the alliances, when America entered the war, that triggered Germany to declare war on us, and us to declare war on Germany, and etc. So it all sort of kicks off from that point. The director John Lasseter, known for his work with Pixar and his subsequent departure from Pixar for offenses, said, "My father pulled into Pearl Harbor 4 days after the bombing, and he said everything was still burning. He said they never told the public how bad it was. It was really bad." There's some important information that you guys need to know, and I will give you some time to write this down, but I do know that you'll have access to these slides, so I'm not going to do everything. So first of all, it was a Sunday morning. America was complacent, meaning we did not believe in any way that there would be the ability of any enemy to attack us there. Sunday morning means that we were particularly poorly staffed. Many people were, off for the weekend or at church or wherever it was. And so there was, which actually ends up being better largely because fewer people died, even though 2,403 Americans were in fact killed. 188 planes were destroyed, 18 ships sunk or badly damaged. Hold that thought for 1 second. Around 350 Japanese planes were involved in the attack in each of the different waves from the two directions. But I do want to point out numbers 6 and 7. Japan did not destroy any of the American aircraft carriers. They weren't there. They're out just basically by luck. We're out in the open ocean. So the aircraft carriers, which are the most important, the most expensive, and the most difficult to replace, were not destroyed on the attack, or during the attack on December 7th. And secondly, neither, and basically by sheer luck, were our oil reserves. So we could continue to use the Pearl Harbor once it was cleaned up as a refueling site. So some of the major Japanese objectives were not met, leading Admiral Yamamoto later to say, allegedly, historians are unsure if this is real, but I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant. This was a major event. America had not been at war with Japan. Yes, we knew Japan, that it was possible that was going to happen, but we were not at war. And all that happens is now this attack brings the United States fully into the fighting. Roosevelt goes to Congress to ask them to declare war. And of course, one of his most famous speeches. I am going to link to it. I'm going to actually ask that somebody shows this speech. The video is here. It's not long. It's about 6.5 minutes. It is quite possibly the most famous speech of President Roosevelt's career, which is, to be frank, saying something. He was a gifted orator. But if I have not shown this speech in class previously, you may not have seen it, but I'm going to want to ask everyone to watch it today. So this is December 1941. It takes a while for the United States to sort of get into the war. And for the first 6 months, it's not looking great. You see on this map the extent to which Japan was able to extend its reach all the way almost to Midway. They controlled all of this, which is quite a lot of the Pacific Ocean. I'm going to come back to island hopping when we get there, sort of near, actually really tomorrow. But I want to start with the order of things that happened in 1942. The first thing is that the Philippines, which remember were an American colony, fall. Pretty far away from any ability to defend it. Douglas MacArthur, the admiral in charge, vows that he shall return. The Japanese soldiers put Filipinos and Americans, who again were fighting on the same side, they marched them along what's called the Bataan Death March, a forced 65-mile march that 70,000 prisoners were put on, going basically from north to south. And it was brutal. On the first day, I saw two. This is a direct quote from someone who survived the march. On the first day, I saw two things I will never forget. A Filipino man had been beheaded. His body lay on the ground with blood everywhere. His head was a short distance away. Just the worst kind of barbarism that one can imagine. And this is sort of continuing the same quote. Eventually, the road became so crowded, we were marched into a clearing. Here, for 2 hours, we got our first taste of the Oriental sun treatment, which drains the stamina and weakens the spirit. When I thought I could stand the penetrating heat no longer, I was determined to have a sip of the tepid water in my canteen. I had no more than unscrewed the top when the aluminum flask was snatched from my hands. The Jap who had crept behind me poured the water into a horse's nose bag and threw down the canteen. Right. American leaders you need to know from the Pacific are Douglas MacArthur was the Army leader. Chester Nimitz was the leader of the United States Navy. Just some sort of images from this time. So the Philippines has fallen. We're now going to have the Battle of the Coral Sea. This is in May of 1942. Japan is attacking Australia, which is, of course, part of the British Empire. This is an entirely aerial battle, meaning it's only airplanes. But it also results in Japan's advance being stopped. This is sort of the southernmost point that Japan is able to get to before the British and the Americans are able to start pushing them back. The same basic thing happens in Midway, which we'll talk about next. But the important thing about Coral Sea is not just that Japan is pushed back. That's important. That's crucial that Japan is not able to, capture Australia, but that they also lose 2 aircraft carriers. The Pacific Ocean is really big. The ability to land on an aircraft carrier and then take off again with being able to refuel on this ocean is a major advantage. Losing 2 aircraft carriers is a big, big deal, especially for a country that knows it's going to be outmatched in terms of resources. You see, this is the Coral Sea. It's down just off the northeast coast of Australia, sort of between Australia and the Solomon Islands. And sort of the next month is the first major battle between the United States and Japan. It's called, as you see it on the right side of the screen, the easternmost part of the map, the Battle of Midway. Some images from the battle. Some background. In April of 1942, the United States bombed Tokyo. Just once, just sort of to prove that it could be done. And it was really the first taste that Japan had that their actual home islands were vulnerable. They could be attacked. And this leads Japan to adopt a strategy of trying to expand its influence as quickly as possible, recognizing that they could not probably hold out forever. Right? This is a map of the, Doolittle raid, which I believe at least one group did for NHG this year. So the Battle of Midway takes place 2 months later in June of 1942, the month after the Battle of Coral Sea. The United States intercepted a Japanese code and learned of the plan to attack near Midway Island, which is, as it sounds, about halfway between the United States and Japan. The Japanese were surprised. Many of their ships were unarmed. They weren't able to defend themselves. Code breakers. This is the code as it has been declassified. Just general images from the battle, American planes on aircraft carriers. This is a vicious 3-day battle. For Japan has to retreat. Japan loses another 4 aircraft carriers. That means that in really just over a month, Japan lost 6 aircraft carriers. And this is this is basically the turning point of the Pacific War. I know it sounds weird because the war had only just begun, but from this point forward, America and Britain together were able to start pushing Japan back. Now it's going to take 3 more years, and the most brutal fighting imaginable, going literally islands to island, pushing Japan back. But from this point, it seemed unlikely Japan was going to be able to, capture any additional territory, which is, by the way, I would think we can agree, a good thing. More images from Midway. You see this plane dropping a bomb. Survivor George Gay is in the hospital. He survived the Battle of Midway. And so I'm going to link this as well. This is a video about the Bataan Death March. A video about the Battle of Midway. And I'm going to pause here for today. Tomorrow, I'll pick up with a little bit more about island hopping. I'll pick up with Iwo Jima. I'll pick up with the Battle of Okinawa. And I will introduce the idea of the atomic bombings and what that means, what the United States why the United States might have taken that decision, and why it has remained so controversial to this day. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Wilcox has the instructions. They'll be on Canvas. Have a great day, and I will see you soon. All right, everyone, take care.